All right, are we good to go?
Not just yet, 1 second. Okay, all set, thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's call this meeting to order. And before we begin, just wanted to really highlight our appreciation for our staff that has really helped lead us through this work. So Karen and Gina and Mark, Devon and Patrice, Corvan and Marcus, Bryn, Mr. Milton too, Anthony. Really thank y'all for sticking with us through this work. We know the conversations have not always been easy, and there are certainly a respectful space for room for disagreement. But that's why we're here to walk through those things. So let's go ahead and get started with the presentation for tonight by looking at the agenda.
Okay, I'm gonna share 1 moment.
All right, so got the call to order. Can we get a approval of minutes dated November 5th, 2020? We'll do that at the end. Review our charge statement and purpose and timeline, update of responses to questions and comments, review what we heard from last meeting, and then we'll review 2 documents, partnering with law enforcement, flow and guidance, and then we'll review and continue to discuss restorative justice district-wide implementation, best practices, and implications for budget and policy. I think it'll be useful for all of us to really start thinking in the frame of a 3 to 5 year implementation plan. That's something Bryn has highlighted. That'll be really important for our work going forward. Then going on to 8 and 9. Making connections to restorative justice and policy number 4147. And within this, we'll discuss budget and policy recommendations that we have received. What do we need to do to continue on that work? What needs to be revised and strengthened? And then review next meeting times, dates, and proposed agenda items. Let's go ahead and review that right now, actually. So just a reminder for the review of the charge of the committee, charge of the ad hoc committee. The committee is charged with examining safety and security options for our high schools related to the removal of SROs out of Madison Metropolitan School District high schools. The work of the committee will focus on budget and policy recommendations to the board. So we have considered information regarding the 2016 ad hoc committee. We are considering safety and security high school systems that would remain the same, revised, strengthened, and or changed. Key question is what needs to be in place when schools reopen. So consider resources needed to support safe schools. What does a reallocation of resources look like? What kind of resources should we be thinking about and using? And then really in the heart of this work is review and make recommendations regarding current Board of Education policies regarding safety, security, and police involvement. So those are policies 4224, 4147, and 4400. All right. And next slide is cool. And our continuing guiding question has been, how can the district be more proactive in promoting healthy student behavior, restorative justice philosophies, and equitable school safety and climate? Quick review of timeline. So for this meeting, we are getting a presentation and we'll have an opportunity to ask questions and revise, if necessary, our partnering with law enforcement policy. We will review successful implementation of restorative justice, what we've learned from other districts that have been down this road, and then connect these to policy and budget recommendations. And in the next meeting, December 3rd, please think about what you need to know to further produce budget and policy recommendations. Again, I think a useful frame for this is, what does a 3 to 5 year restorative justice implementation plan look like? What does accountability look like? And then what kind of resource investment do we need from a budgetary perspective? So here's what we heard the last meeting about initial discussion of lessons learned from other districts about successful implementation. And what I think we will continue to hear tonight is a desire to learn what's working elsewhere and implications for our policy and budget recommendations, a desire to evaluate what's being done here already. So kind of a lay of the land here. It seems like there are a lot of different initiatives going on, but we need a cohesive strategy, a universal strategy, and the importance of involving school voice from both students and teachers and talking about what is needed. The presentation on school-based critical response teams, the importance of family engagement, engaging community agencies before critical incidents occur, so we have that established relationship for when we are perhaps in a mode of heightened emotion or high pressure situations. Having that relationship established will be really important. The importance of valuing experience of school-based staff. This is really important, but we also recognize, school-based staff voice is not a monolith, and they come with varying degrees of opinion. All those opinions should be respected and valued. And then a discussion of guidance on when to involve police, what the protocols will be, what the standards are, and what does accountability look like. And finally, an overall desire for action. So, question and answer document with responses. Does everyone have that document, and have they been able to track questions and answers as they have come in? If you don't have access to that document, please let us know, and also feel free to voice questions in the meeting as well. Maybe we can get some answers or go through some brainstorming here. And as always, please email your questions to us. All right, so if I am not wrong here, this is where we're going to start with our when we involve law enforcement presentation. And I believe Mark is going to present on this one.
Gina and I are going to do it.
Oh, Mark and Gina will be presenting on this one. Thank you, Gina. I'm sorry.
Just one more reminder for committee members, please make sure your video is on. Thank you.
Yeah, Barb, do you want me to share my screen, or are you able to click on the guidance document and then we can walk through it?
Whatever you want to do, Gina.
If you can share yours, that'd be great.
Mine?
Okay, I'll stop.
Okay, I can't
Oop.
do it.
1 second. Okay, should be good.
All right. So this is the document that was linked into the slide deck. And, I think it's important to just kind of give you a very quick where we've been, where we are right now, and where we're hoping to go. This flowchart has been almost a year in the making and has seen lots of different drafts. It's gone through many phases and changes. It's been edited and vetted by different groups of people at central office. All of our high school APs and their teams have looked at it. We've had some community partners look at it when it was in its infancy. I think, you know, at even one point I might have had it drawn on a notebook and shared it with people. So it's been quite the process. And it's still very much a living document. It is a draft. We want you to provide feedback, but this is our kind of our somewhat final formulation of what we hope to do when we are making decisions over determining whether or not law enforcement need to be involved in situations that are happening within our school buildings or on our campuses. So what I'll start with is this, I might just like scroll or zoom in a little so you can see the different parts. Okay. Oh my, okay. So we would start with when an incident occurs, and I want to also just make a note there that while I know that a lot of people really want examples, like, well, tell us the different incidents or give us examples of what types of situations, blah, blah, blah. We could do that. We have past situations and we have past examples. But what I've really found and what I've learned from, you know, my training in threat assessment and violence risk assessment is that it's really important that we don't provide like, you know, specific, like a specific formula or a specific routine for people to follow, because each situation is specific, and we really want to make sure that our school teams are trained to understand the skills and the actual process behind what they're doing, and not necessarily just following a checkbox for, you know, type thing. So, you know, I know that that's something that's come up, and so that is the reason that that we're going to just kind of explain this in a little bit more broader terms. The other thing I want to make sure people know is that this is a document that is intended for school-based critical response teams. So that would be school administrators and their teams, which includes psychs, social workers, counselors, nurses, school security assistants, behavior education assistants, deans, PBIS coaches. You know, really, it contains those individuals that are working regularly every day with kids and helping them get through the day through their social, emotional, behavioral implications and support. So if I, you know, say the word like you or this or whatever, I'm really focusing mostly on our school-based teams. Among a lot of things that these teams do, they do, you know, because of the specific flow chart, we're just talking about law enforcement. So as you heard, you know, last or 2 weeks ago, these critical response teams do a lot. And so we are not going into too much detail on all the different things that they do proactively and to support our students through various assessments. We're really just focusing on when they have to make that decision about involving law enforcement. So I just want to make that one more caveat as well. So when the team convenes and needs to decide if law enforcement should be involved based on our, you know, Wisconsin state statutes, there's really some different ways that we can look at discretion. Okay, there we go. That's better. So we can determine, and again, like I have said several times already, that every situation is specific, and we need to be looking at each situation through various contexts. But for you know, the majority of situations, we can assume that we do not have discretion over situations that involve an imminent threat to safety. So those are our emergency situations, and we need to be involving law enforcement. We also have situations that involve substantial harm to self or others. We know that a lot of times we end up involving law enforcement when there is a substantial battery, or if a student is, you know, has attempted to harm themselves or attempted suicide, some things like that. We do obviously require the need for additional support through law enforcement intervention. There's also instances where law enforcement end up being involved because of mandated reporting. A lot of times if a situation, we contact Child Protective Services, they could refer the case to law enforcement, or they could ask law enforcement to accompany them to an assessment for a student that might be they're doing their investigation around potential for abuse or neglect. So those are some instances where law enforcement could be involved. And then also, we added in here that law enforcement, could always be involved if a parent, a community member, or a student requests, if they call 911, or if they request the need for law enforcement, that's another time then that we have that interaction with law enforcement. If any time, Mark, you're welcome to chime in here, but if any time that our schools, we always say, we kind of, have this term, this pause and call. Like, we always want people to take a moment if they can and are able to call our, to call Mark, our director of safety and security, to call, Karen, to call me, Bryn, somebody that, is on our, one of our critical response teams, or our student support team. Sorry, I got a call from a colleague who should know that I'm here right now. Okay. And so anyway, there's always that option for consultation there. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, if I can just jump in. Since I've been here, I've been with the district for a little over a year now, and there has not been one time where an individual has called the police into a school without calling myself or Karen Kepler first. Which is coming from seeing both sides of the fence, the law enforcement side and the security director side, is pretty impressive, which tells me that people are actually thinking before they call. They're trying to work through a situation without necessarily involving the police. Like Gina said, there's times where we don't really have a choice. Our hands are tied. Sexual assaults, attempted suicide, stuff like that. We're considered mandated or mandatory reporters, and we have to report that. The police, on the other hand, are very in tune to what goes on at the school district, and like we've said in past meetings, we have weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings with the police department, with the command staff of the police department, so we can all stay on the same page. So I think it's important for everybody to know that it's not necessarily that people are calling the police whenever there's an issue. There is a chain of command, I guess, if you will, where things are being vetted out before police are actually called in. The other caveat to that is once the police do get into the schools, they actually contact myself or Karen to walk through a situation in order to avoid arresting and everything else with kids.
Thanks, Mark. So we looked at this box right here. You can see my cursor, I'm hoping. And then if we looked at this box to the right of it, sometimes we make the decision that we do have discretion and that we are going to attempt to do some other things that are part of our school-based critical response team practices that could involve the behavior education plan, reviewing the student's IEP if they have one, involving community members or community partners, and then additional school-based interventions below. And then having discretion doesn't mean that we won't necessarily contact law enforcement. Discretion means we aren't necessarily required to based on a state statute, but it does seem like that is the right thing to do to connect with law enforcement. Once we've decided what we're going to do, it's always important that we're documenting the incident. And there's a little asterisk here and probably up here as well. This flowchart has a 6-page guidance document that accompanies it. And a big reason for that was because I know that the nature of a flowchart is an attempt to keep it to be a 1-page and something simple to be able to look at quickly for guidance. But at the same time, this is not simple. This stuff is very complex. So we also pulled each section of this flowchart out to give it more information within the guidance document that is connected to this. So there is more information as you keep scrolling if you choose to. So if we, after we're documenting.
Excuse me,
Yep.
Martha has her hand up. I wasn't sure if you wanted to take a question now.
Sure.
I just wanted to note if you scroll up just a little bit to the previous section where it talks about determining discretion when there is something going on, reviewing the IEP is not open to everybody as it's stated. It's a protected document, so they would be best to connect with the IEP team. As specifically the special ed teacher, the person who coordinates the entire team, because they can't just go straight into it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. Again, and I apologize for using the term you, but the critical response team is a team of administrators and school-based support staff that likely would be able to, if the student has a behavior intervention plan, like a BIP, or if they do have specific goals that are related to behavior, that the support staff do have access to that, because they are responsible for supporting and making sure that the students are able to access education through the use of those supports, like social work support, psych support, something like that. So that's what it means by that, is that if there is an IEP, that there would be, this team would specifically be able to connect either with the team that knows the student the best, which, like you said, is the case manager, or maybe even the program support teacher, or it's the members of this critical response team that's assessing the situation.
But you're still saying review the IEP, which makes it sound like this team can have access to it when they shouldn't have direct access to it. So I get what you're saying. And I know the BEP can be more readily accessed through that way. But if this is allowed to be accessed through the team, can you provide me the documentation that the parents sign off on to give access to that team, if that exists?
Sure. Yeah. If a student, yeah. And if you have ideas of how to modify that specific bullet, please send it to Mark and we'll review it. But I'll also send you just information about how we have the people that make up the critical response teams are also the people. I was searching for the word related services. And so a lot of times students do have our support staff or mental health professionals within our buildings as a related service. And they do have access to looking at the IEP. So maybe the review is a little bit more, in this case, it's not like a formal review, like a review revise. It's actually just like looking at it. So maybe we just need to change the word review. So I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So as we, and I don't want to take up too much more time here, but I just want to point out a couple more things. If we do decide to involve if the decision is made to involve law enforcement, like I said before, there are some different ways that we do that. Obviously, there are these immediate emergency situations that require a contact to 911. We would use emergency procedures in our standard response protocol, which our staff are trained in, and there are live links in the guidance document to those procedures that are available for anybody to see the way that we respond to emergency situations. The other yellow box would be a consult with law enforcement partners. And again, that would be a decision that we do need to involve law enforcement. It's not an emergency. We need to think about the best way to go about doing that. And that would likely, as we talked about last 2 weeks ago with these critical response teams that are trained in threat assessment, we have law enforcement partners that are also trained in threat assessment, the same national model that we're all trying to get our staff and across the state of Wisconsin trained in, so that we can have a really solid, universal, and proactive way to address school safety through this like assessment and planning process that we really do believe will divert youth away from the justice system. And we can do that by using law enforcement as a partner and a consult, and not necessarily needing the youth to be directly involved with law enforcement, but instead using their expertise around situations that are violent risks, suicide risk, threat assessment, again, really focusing on that mental health unit, and the sergeant at the mental health unit, Sarah Shimko, and as well as her mental health officers all know about this process. We've worked with them on our procedures and whatnot, so that they do understand that there are times when we are really wanting to maintain control within our own buildings with the kids and the families and staff that we know, but we also, would like to have that opportunity for that consult. That consult would be a call to Mark, could also be a call to me, but that really, that would be the best way to get that started. And again, this is me talking to our critical response teams for making those calls. I would say that the other things that could possibly happen is that, depending on the situation, student could be taken into custody and removed. They could be removed and released right to the parent. They could be removed and go to the juvenile reception center, which, it is different than like juvenile detention. They could go, and that's why you see a whole bunch of arrows going all different directions, because they could go to JRC and then go home to the parent, or they could go to jail and then go home to the parent, or they could stay there. And again, wish I could get into much more detail. We have a lot of additional flowcharts and a lot of information on that piece that we'd be happy to share at some point. The other thing that is important to note, and I think that might be the last thing that we discuss, is the relatively new practice of referring youth age 12 to 16 directly to a restorative referral. So before January 1st of 2020, youth that were eligible for a citation were issued a citation and then had the option of getting connected to a community program to do restorative justice. As of January 1st, 2020, all youth that were eligible for a citation are directly referred. So they're not given a citation, they're not issued a ticket, they're directly referred to a community agency. And I know we've got some representation from some of these agencies here tonight. And so I just want to make sure that people, know that process has nothing, there are students, obviously, some of the youth that might get these direct referrals, but this specific process this is laid out, only refers to the Madison Police Department's contract with Dane County, who in Dane County connects with, or, funds these agencies to do this restorative process. So I think that sometimes gets confusing because we as an MMSD have additional partnerships and memorandums of understanding with these agencies below, but that doesn't, that's not in connection to this specific process. This specific process is MPD contracting with Dane County, who contracts with these agencies to provide restorative options for our youth in lieu of citations. So I just want to make that clear, because that often gets a little confusing, because we have multiple partnerships across systems, and sometimes those can get a little convoluted. And a big hope in laying out this flow chart is to help make some sense of that, and then to help us continue to just work as best as we can together. And then, of course, at the bottom, we're always creating plans with student, staff, family, and community partners, monitoring those plans and providing support as needed. and then assessing them, shifting them, or ending them if they're no longer appropriate or applicable to the student or the specific situation. And like I said, and I won't go into this, but if you kept scrolling in the guidance document, you would see that we pull out each specific piece of the flowchart and then talk about it in much more detail. All right, Mark, anything else?
No, I just want to reiterate the custody and removal piece. From the police perspective, the preferred option is the release to the parent. JRC is not a facility that's designed to hold many people, number one. Number two, the kids that are actually in JRC are actually are charged with felony crimes, things that are a lot more serious. So from a police perspective, JRC, although it's an option, but the ultimate goal is to release the child to the parent rather than take them up there. Even at the jail level at 17, they still move to release the child to the parent. And there's a bunch of different options that the police have when it comes to lower level incidents. Anything that's not a felony, they can issue a city ordinance citation, they can issue a county citation, and they can issue what we call an order-in ticket, which basically is a ticket that has no monetary value or no monetary statute whatsoever. It's just an order-in ticket. It's basically a referral. You need to go in and talk to the judge to get this cleared up. So from a police perspective, when they come into the schools, they actually spend a lot of time consulting with us to figure out, not necessarily figure out what they need to do, but to figure out the best option for the child, because they really don't want to be taking kids to jail. They definitely don't want to take them to JRC, and they would rather that the situation is dealt with at the school level and through the BEP. So I think a lot of misconception is about this JRC piece and thinking that kids are constantly taken up there, and they're not. And it's actually the last option that the police want. I really want to emphasize the consultation part of it. I am a retired police officer with City of Madison, and I think everybody that's been pretty much in that position as security director has been a retired officer from the City of Madison Police Department. So we have a good relationship with them. I think as we navigate through this committee and talk about policies and budgetary issues, and I've said this to my group many a times, I think now is the right time. Now is the prime time, the opportune time for this group to really get something down on paper is what we would like to see and really start working with the police department. Right now, we have a very young department, very educated department. A lot of the police officers are former teachers, nurses, psychologists, sociologists, and they understand this process. And I think now it's time to really get on the same page with the police department, so we're all working towards the same common goals: keep these kids out of jail, keep them in school, keep them progressing through, so they can go out to society and do great things. So that's all I wanted to add.
Mm-hmm.
Sabrian, can I ask a question? This is Wayne Strong.
Oh, please do.
So I wanted to, first of all, thanks a lot, Gina and Mark, for the presentation. I want to go back to something that I think is absolutely critical, and I don't want us to make the mistake of glossing over it when we talk about discretion. That is critical.
Mm-hmm.
Because we talk about discretion, but we're also talking about situations. Each situation is different, but what we've known and what we've seen historically is that for the same offense, Black children are referred and have the police call them at much higher rates than their white counterparts. So we know there's a huge discrepancy there, and that's critical when we talk about discretion in terms of who we're going to call the police on and why, and making sure that if the decision is made to call the police for a nonviolent offense, then that there is documentation in place to make sure that we're showing what those reasons were. And the same thing should be occurring when you make a decision not to involve the police. There should be documentation under documenting the circumstances, why or why not. And I think it's important to also make sure that we're looking at demographics, because if we're going to look at the decreasing disparities in terms of suspensions and expulsions and dropout rates, that it's critical that we are documenting all of this information. Who are the cops being called on, when, and why? And also another piece that's critical is you may deem that the officer showing up should issue a citation based on your consultation with your team, but the officer also has discretion. They may say they're not going to issue a witness, and that's their discretion as well. Now, and that's for the reason being is that discretion is important, and what we see is that oftentimes, especially if the kid is already having a some sort of discipline taken, like for example, they're being kicked out of school, say for a disorderly conduct or disobedience or talking back or something like that. And the person or the staff person or whoever feels that the person was also disorderly, so then the cops are called, and now you want a disorderly conduct ticket on top of that. We've had that happen in the past where we've done that. We've allowed that to happen. So it's critical that we make sure that we're documenting the reasons why and why not officers are being called into the school under those circumstances.
Yeah, I also have a question. So I'm looking up some MMSD data from, I think this is from the 2015, 2016 school year, and then the 2017-2018 school year. And it says that 60% of students arrested were taken to the juvenile reception center. 25% of students that were arrested between the ages of 17 and 18 were taken to the Dane County Jail, and only 9% of arrests resulted in students being released to a parent or guardian. And of course, the majority of those students were Black. 81% of school-based arrests and 82% of school-based citations were Black students in 2017, 2018. Do we have any like more recent data or any
Yes.
updated data that shows
and I think the other thing to just continue to remember is that we're not saying, I mean, we have significant racial disparities. We know that. I mean, that is very, that is something that MMSD continues to look at and think critically about every day. This is the hope. This is not something, I think what I often feel, especially in these spaces, is that we're looking at all these things that MMSD has done, and we need to be, obviously it's super important to see where we were, and then the hope is to see all these things we're putting into place to impact those significant racial disparities, and for us to really be thinking critically about how we're involving police, making sure, like Wayne, like making sure everything is documented, making sure that when we do, make that decision, that it's not like we are not taking any of this lightly. This flow chart, like I said, has been over a year in the making, because it is so incredibly important that we are not glossing over anything or doing anything without, like, piecing through it with a fine-tooth comb. I will say that our most recent data is from 18-19. We don't have 19-20 data because of the pandemic, but 18-19 data does show significant reductions in the amount of removals, kids ending up being arrested or even being cited on, or issued a ticket on campus. So a kid can also get a ticket and go back to class, like that. Those things aren't necessarily, those aren't connected. Just because something happens that MPD, again, I'm getting into what I didn't want to do, which is these little examples and these little like one-offs. What we're trying to help people with is teaming at a building-based level to really be intentional and critical about how we're assessing what the student needs. And if it does involve law enforcement, then we're partnering with law enforcement to continue to figure out what that student needs. And it's not about getting the student out of the building or, you know, punishing the student or arresting the student. It's about what do we need and who within our community of Madison needs to help us to make sure that we're continuing to wrap around that student. But I will get you that data. But again, like I've said over and over again, it continues to show racial disparities. That is obvious. We have seen significant reductions, and we're going to continue to see reductions, and we need to continue to be focusing on our Black and brown youth, specifically our Black boys, our Black boys age 12 to 16. I think that's who we need to continue to be focusing on.
Yeah,
Hey,
I think in terms of one of the things in terms of like gender, it's really important that we like consider gender across the spectrum, because the 2017-2018 school year, Black girls received more citations than any other demographic within the district. Also, I know it's really hard to collect data about queer youth. Like, we only can collect their experiences, and if they're not comfortable to like, if we're arresting them, harassing them, harming them, they're not going to tell us about any type of gender or sexual identity, to be able to collect data around that. But I think it's also important. And also, yeah, even though the numbers are decreasing, like the total number of citations in 2016, in 2015, 2016 were 148, and then in 2016, 2017 they were 148 in 2015, 2016, and then 108 in 2016, 2017. What we see is the disparity is actually the same. This disparity has remained consistent over the last, this data is for the last 3 years. So yeah, again, a reduction doesn't mean necessarily a decrease in disparity. And also just reiterating that it's important to think about Black youth, Black and brown youth across the gender spectrum, and all of those intersections that impact their ability to do well, and their ability to not be harmed in school.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, and I really appreciate the acknowledging all genders.
I just wanted to add to that as I was kind of listening and hearing stuff. So, like, I heard people talking last meeting, and what will continue to be like, how when it comes to restorative justice, we need to have a role that focuses on that. So I feel the same way when it comes to this. A security safety coordinator at the high schools, like a position that can focus on making sure we do those things, because right now we have assistant principals who are deemed the security principals. That isn't all that they do. They have so many other things to focus on, which means things like this, right, kind of hit the back burner. So if we're looking at, number one, putting people of color in positions to be able to have an impact in high schools, this is a prime opportunity to do that, because these are people that Mark Brown can connect with, that can have that day-to-day connection in schools, working with administration, and making that their primary focus, I think will help when it comes to that contact with police and all of that stuff. If we have that kind of liaison, because that's how people saw the EROs, right? These are people that just connect us quicker to some resources. But in this position, we can have somebody there who's not only looking at how we keep our building and our kids safe, but how we actually close that disparity gap, right? Because just because it's only 50, like she said, just because it goes down to 50 citations, if all of those citations are still Black kids, then we still have a problem, right? So I think there needs to be a specific role, especially, right? We know we were paying them to be there. So what are we doing with that money? Let's give opportunities for people from the community. Let's give opportunities to women, people of color, LGBT, like, give somebody an opportunity to step inside a role that can partner with administration, because, right, administration is difficult. They got a lot going on. We need a role that focuses on what we're trying to do here. And so that would be my suggestion, because then we can really get at those issues that we are trying to lessen. So.
I can chime in and kind of piggyback off what Anthony said. It's very true. I mean, when you stretch things thin, things fall through the cracks. And right now, what I've seen with the district, people are wearing many hats. And this is something that, you know, that we need to minimize the number of hats that a person is wearing in order to deal with this. And I totally agree with what Wayne said too, documentation. The documentation piece of it, you know, to actually get a good handle on what is actually happening and be able to take that information and actually put it to action. Like I said before, we're dealing with an unprecedented time, basically, where we have new administration coming in as a school board, Dr. Jenkins is coming in, who's new to the area. We've got a new police chief coming in. We've got a relatively young police department. Now is the time to really start thinking of ways to really make those changes and make them happen. As Anthony said, you know, when you're stretched thin, things fall through the cracks. And I mean, it's just a fact of life. I think that we really need to start concentrating more on putting our resources in places where it can actually help and actually, you know, start to move things in a positive direction.
Lori, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to share. So we have been, historically, the Time Bank has done some restorative justice work as alternatives to citations within the high schools. And it's associated with municipal citations. And in the presentation from Gina, the initiative that she's referencing in terms of starting January 1st, kids that are between the ages of 12 and 16 who get municipal citations from law enforcement can get a direct referral to restorative justice. I just wanted to share that there's direct referral that can happen from MMSD to community partners without involving law enforcement in the schools. And so I also wanted to say that the relying on law enforcement to get youth into restorative justice in the community isn't a good strategy because it involves law enforcement, which is harmful to youth. And then also because that initiative doesn't account for any of your 17 or 18 or 19-year-old students. Only 12 to 16-year-olds are able to go through restorative justice through the community-based initiative that is within the flow chart that was shown. So that leaves out 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and any students that you have that are over that age. So, and again, those are municipal citations only. And in my experience in working with kids that are getting municipal citations through these, there's no need to have law enforcement contact in a lot of those situations. They're not imminent safety threat situations. So and also the final thing that I'll say on it is when the ERO ad hoc committee was meeting last time, there was an agreement to eliminate municipal citations within MMSD and to refer all of those youth to restorative justice, to the restorative justice work that was happening in the school buildings. And so municipal citations should not even be occurring within MMSD.
Yeah, and I just think that goes back to what Mark was saying. So many people doing so many things, all of that, it's falling through the cracks, and we need people that this is their focus. We need roles that this is what they do, because if it's really important to us, it shouldn't be anything for us to actually put the resources behind it. We're talking about creating a role that is really about the crux of why we're meeting, the crux of why we continue to struggle, our kids continue to struggle, and it's about feeling safe, right, at school. It's about feeling safe in classrooms. It's about all of that. And so we have to, if that's what we're saying is important, we have to make sure we allocate the resources to that.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make sure to Lori that, I think, we often maybe are just slightly, not fully understanding it the same way. We absolutely, if I truly believe all of our schools would prefer to use community restorative options before involving law enforcement. This flow chart is specifically when the decision is made to involve law enforcement, that an option is a referral to restorative justice. That's one of the options once law enforcement's involved. But if you look, please, I hope everybody, I know we don't have enough time, but please, I hope you all take a really critical look at this document, because there's a green box with all the different strategies that we do as a school-based staff. Our teams are working really hard to connect kids to resources, mental health, restorative justice, engaging the family, doing a lot of problem solving and stuff like that. Those low level things, we do not want to be involving law enforcement, and law enforcement doesn't want to be involved either. They don't want to be coming to our buildings to deal with this type of stuff. So, yes, we 100% want to do as much as we can at our school base level, because we have those relationships. We know our kids. We really want to do that. So I apologize if the flowchart doesn't necessarily reflect that. But I think it's just really important to note that and I know that I am, I'm not in a school currently, but I've been in a lot of schools and worked a lot with the people here that are, in our high school buildings, and I know all the work that they're doing. So, and again, I'm not trying, I mean, there's always more work that needs to be done, and it needs to be, we need more funding, we need to rewrite policy, and that's a really nice segue into probably the next part of our time together.
Yeah, Gina, thank you.
One more, Savion, if it's cool, I have one more thing to say, and then I have to hop off to go to another meeting. So I think, one of the things with like liberal cities like Madison, and we're also seeing this happen in like Oakland and Denver and other like more liberal, so-called seemingly progressive cities across the nation, is that things are often really, really great on paper, right? Things like there's a lot of thought and intention about writing policies that are, again, progressive or seemingly social justice oriented, but then the ways in which those policies get implemented, like Wayne said earlier, like we have, like people have discretion, people have, like, the policy doesn't account for racial disparities, the policy doesn't account for anti-Blackness, the policy doesn't account for sexism, right, or homophobia. The policies just don't and can't account for that. So the question is, like, what are we going to do when those policies are not implemented in the way that they're supposed to be implemented? What are we going to do when people call police on children unnecessarily, or people harm children in schools, which is, I mean, last year, I don't know how many reports of like teachers using N-words and teachers like, doing harmful, very anti-Black things, and homophobic things and sexist things to young people. So I know Mark emailed yesterday a policy of accountability that's student-led and student-controlled, and I really think that is not a overall solution to that problem, but a part of it, right? Like, there's a lot of accountability for young people, right? We can call the police on them, we can suspend them, we can expel them, we can send them to the in-school detention, we can like say awful things to them, we can give them bad grades. Like, there's a lot of accountability for young people in terms of like what we as adults can do to them, but there's no accountability of what students can do to us to hold us accountable for causing harm and disrupt schools. And I think that is like really important, that we're not authoritative and that we're truly student centered and empowering young people to not only think about the very policies that we're discussing. I know we've had like students come and be a part of these discussions, but like having a seat at the table from my Black liberation lens is not enough, right? Because we've tried that for 400 years, literally, right? Have Black voices at the table, and it hasn't shifted any type of power, and it hasn't made us any freer, quite frankly. So I think we need to put policies in place, as we're discussing budgets and policies, put policies in place that allow young people to hold grown people accountable, in addition to us being able to hold them accountable. So I hope that next week, I don't know if folks are going to discuss Freedom Inc.'s proposal today, but I hope that in the next 2 weeks, we really spend some intentional time talking about that, because I do think that it's an issue of power. Again, like school boards, elected officials, teachers, administrators, like we really do hold all the power as adults, and we don't give the young people that same type of power. And I think it's a very it's wrapped up in a lot of white supremacy, why we don't believe that young people should be able to not just have a voice, but have control and self-determination over their lives. So I really hope, again, that we get to discuss that policy next week. And in the next 2 weeks. Folks are welcome to email me ahead of time if they have questions or want to sit down. And also, I can also recommend that we bring other people from Freedom Inc. in, including our young people, to like really talk about what our vision is, and really talk about this community control proposal, and how we can successfully implement that in a holistic way. All right, peace, y'all. I'll see y'all in 2 weeks.
Hey, all right. Well, thank you, Bianca. Anyway, thanks everybody for your thoughts. We will be discussing the proposal that Freedom Inc. and Bianca submitted. I think that the spirit is something that we definitely want to try to achieve, but we also have to fulfill our obligation and compliance to state and federal law, particularly with IDEA and with FERPA, but we will get into that later. Again, thank you, Gina, for that presentation and all the work you put into that over the years. And as we look at our policy revisions, we can definitely spell out the need to be more intentional, to Anthony's point, in terms of what roles we want to see in our schools, and the need to be like meticulous in data documentation for accountability. And then how do we include voices in those accountability measures when policy is not followed? And so with that, let's move forward to the next presentation. And just looking at the time, it looks like we won't get to everything on the agenda, which is okay. We're having meaningful, thoughtful conversations, but just wanted to put that out there. Can someone remind me who is presenting this next one on restorative justice and what we've learned from around the country?
Yeah, Savion, I'm starting us off here, and then others will jump in a little bit. So good to be back with you all again tonight. We are going to be spending the next little chunk of time. We've heard this community ask for opportunities to learn from other districts around the country. So we are going to be spending some time looking at what implementation or kind of components, high-level components of restorative justice implementation looks like in several districts that are kind of seen to be leading the way in the country. We'll be spending some time looking at kind of lessons learned about what is working, what is having an impact, and what isn't having an impact. And then we'll try to leave plenty of time at the end for conversation and for questions. And that's when I think Lori, I'll be starting us off here, but Lori and Ayu and others who are doing the work especially can jump in there at that point. So rather than me or us just kind of like talking a lot and sharing a lot of information verbally, we have a document that kind of outlines, that looks at three districts, Oakland Unified, St. Paul, and Denver, and kind of looks at various components of their restorative justice implementation. And we're going to give you a little bit of time to take a look at that individually, and then we'll come back together. So I don't know, do you all have access to the slides? Or if not, Barb, could you put the link to that document, the RJ implementation document? Could you put that in the chat so that people can access that? Okay, Lana, sorry, we don't have access to chat for a public meeting like this. Everything though is in the board docs. I think what you're talking about is there. I can pull it up, put it on the screen if you like. Yeah, that would be great. However we can get it in front of people. Okay. And if you are able to access it yourself through board docs, there are other documents linked in there. And so I think it would be helpful if people can kind of have their own access so that they can explore at their own pace as they want to. I don't have a good sense of how long you might need for this. I think we'll look at maybe 6 or 7 minutes of kind of individual looking at this, and I'll do a time check at that point and see if we're good and kind of ready to come back, or if you need a few more minutes. Are people able to find that? Barb can also put it up. Okay, Lana. Yeah. I don't see the document in board docs. I see the flow chart. Is there something attached to that?
It's linked in the slide.
It's linked in the slide. Okay, one moment. Thank you. Yeah, the first slide, Barb, I think it's RJ implementation in leading districts, something like that is what the document is called. Examples of RJ in schools. Is that the document?
Not the one with the tree picture, the next one.
Implementation in several leading districts is what it's called. I have it. Thank you. Let me share that. Thank you. So I will do a time check in about 6 minutes and see where we're at.
Oh, is everything good?
I'm just letting people know that I have added it to board docs too, so you can pull it up on your own. I'm just scrolling through this a little bit at a time. Have people been able to get into the document on their own so that you can be accessing some of those links? I can't see a lot of faces here, but yes. I'm just going back up a little. Okay. All right, so let's just do a time check here. Are you looking at stuff? Are you wanting a little bit more time to continue digging into it, or are you ready to come back? Maybe Barb, if you could stop screen sharing for a sec, so if we could kind of get a sense of where people are at. Can you give me, I don't know what we need to do here. Give me a thumbs up if you want to come back right now. Okay, it looks like a few people are ready to come back, but maybe more people. Let's take about 2 more minutes, 2 or 3 more minutes, and then we'll all come back.
All right, let's come on back together. And Barb, if you could pull up those slides again, that would be great. So now that we've had a little bit of time to look at kind of get a high level overview of what implementation can look like or has looked like in a couple of districts, we want to look, as I mentioned earlier, at kind of what we know or what we've learned, are learning about what is working and what's not working. We can go on to the next slide. So early this year, January, there was a policy paper that was published, and I think I might have referenced this a couple weeks ago in this group. There were some folks who looked at restorative justice work in districts all around the country, and they put together this paper based on what they saw there. There's a lot here. This actually, in this slide, this whole paper is linked. It's linked in the other document that you were just looking at as well. And I would encourage you to go in there at some point, not right now, but to go in there and read the whole thing. There's a lot of good stuff there. But for right now, I just wanted to lift up a little bit from a piece towards the end. It's on page 12 if you were looking for it, but where they identify what they call misimplementation models. Things that are not working. Yeah, if you just want to show us, Barb, go to page 12. Scroll down to page 12. Actually, don't worry about it. We can skip that for now, and we'll just look at what's on the slide. Thank you. So in that section in this paper, they really describe these different misimplementation models. What's on the screen here right now is actually like looking at it from the opposite direction, kind of what is the antidote of those different models. And I'll just kind of speak to each of these briefly. Instead of a mandated top-down model of restorative justice implementation, we need to make sure that all policy and practice decisions are developed collaboratively and they are clearly communicated with all stakeholders. Instead of a narrow misimplementation model, we need to make sure that our approach is holistic and it's comprehensive and it's connected with other similar efforts and bodies of work, that it's not narrowly focused on one particular component, for example, on work with students around responding to situations. And there's a lot of mindset work that is called up in this piece. With the colorblind or powerblind misimplementation model, the antidote from that, or what is needed, is that restorative justice work has to explicitly be connected with all of our racial justice work and with the commitment that is required to transforming to awareness and to transforming the context in which harm occurs. Train and hope. What we need to do instead of train and hope is make sure that all stakeholders have deep, intensive training. Maisha Wynn talks about 4 days of training for everybody who's involved. And then in addition to this, kind of a real plan for support for ongoing training and support. And then the last implementation model is one that is under-resourced and it's short-term. And the antidote to that is that it, of course, needs to be well-resourced. And we need to have a commitment for being in it for the long haul and knowing that we can't expect to see certain results in a short period of time or too soon. So again, there's much more on all of this, as well as some recommendations in this paper. I would recommend that you take the time at some point to read that. Also, and we don't need to go here right now, Barb, but on the previous slide, I just wanted to call your attention. There's a link to a video. It's called Restoring Schools. And it's not long, it's about 14 minutes. And in that, they interview folks from 5 or 6 districts around the country about what they have learned, what they are learning on their journey towards becoming truly restorative schools and school districts. So with that, we can stop screen sharing so we can all see each other again. And we want to just use the rest of our time for conversation about what you've read, what you noticed, what stood out to you, you know, what connections you're making between what we've done or not done in MMSD, questions. And here's where I'm going to try to back up a little bit and just open it for conversation, and also invite especially Lori and AU and MMSD school-based staff, everyone who's kind of doing the work to join into this conversation. So maybe we'll just start. I'll just throw out an open question. What stood out to you about what you read, what you saw?
Well, I will say, to start it off, what stood out to me is that they had money. They, either, got some great grants or like funding. So it really takes resources. And then I noticed like probably the districts that have a higher number of Black and Brown students, like in bigger cities where, that number went up exponentially. So it really is about resources. So.
In St. Paul, I was wondering what's meant by must have 75% staff in support of becoming restorative justice school before applying. So what did the restorative justice pilot school, like what made it distinctive? And then how did they measure that 75%?
Yeah, so it's my understanding that prior to a school becoming an RJ pilot school, I think they use actually the language of restorative practices there. They spend some time doing some exploration. There are various ways that they can do some learning and some work around this, even without kind of the significant level of resources. And so they do some of that exploration. And then once people know what they're talking about, once people know what they're being asked to say yes to, then they actually have an assessment tool that they use, a pretty simple thing, where they really ask staff, what do you think about this? Are you ready to commit yourself and our school to this work in a deeper way? And it's only then that they can actually submit the application to be considered as a pilot school, which is what brings those significant levels of resources.
Yeah, when I view this, I feel like Denver has really been the best comparable for where we've been and where we want to go, or not where we want to go, but where we've been.
Yeah, well, there's also the resolutions that were passed from the board, So like when we say like in the budget, you see a lot of like where the priorities are. And that also comes from resolutions that are being passed from board members about the commitment, to push this work. So also there are resolutions and policies.
Yeah, I saw Oakland, Board of Education in Oakland had an explicit resolution here.
The thing that's interesting and that's woven throughout some of these is the piece sort of that Bianca was referring to or talking about before in terms of accountability for students and adults associated with restorative justice. And you'll see that in Oakland's school board resolution as well.
I wanted to also add that when I think about what's going down in the classroom and how teachers are practicing, things that are culturally affirming so that it, in fact, pairs with their actual pedagogical practices that would, then inform how they do restorative justice, like what their language is in the classroom, what curriculum they're teaching. I mean, for me, like everything that is about everything here and what I've been able to click through a little bit, something that I'm really wondering about is to what extent are teachers getting the opportunities to be trained to be really truly culturally responsive practitioners, like really culturally affirming, and how are we involving families so that their stories and it's this real holistic approach to justice-oriented work, so that justice-oriented work is actually being used in the home as well as in the schools and in the community. But really like the classroom for me is where all of the practices and pedagogical learning of teachers has to be really uplifted and really honed. Being somebody not only am I a classroom teacher, but I'm also an instructional coach, and something that I notice that teachers do want more of are ways to be more culturally affirming that is not fake or that isn't, written from a textbook, but how, in fact, are they approaching their own work so that they come fully ready to be themselves, so that they allow our students to be fully themselves.
Thank you so much for that. And I recall you mentioning that at the last meeting about how important classroom engagement is, just for students to feel welcomed at a school. And so, that's been something that we've been trying to talk about district-wide, at particularly the elementary level with reading. Is, what ways can we bring the community into the classroom to be culturally affirming, like you said, because, when there is that alienation in the classroom or in the broader school, that can lead down a road of disengagement or perceived misbehavior, etc. So I'm curious how these districts weaved restorative justice into the curriculum and pedagogy as well, how staff modeled restorative justice philosophies, because I think a great scenario is that not only do we have teachers and a staff person that is intentional about restorative justice, but that we begin to see leaders who are students begin to crop up as well, and we have students who are restorative justice leaders in the building too, that can help their peers resolve conflict and de-escalate scenarios as well. So how do these districts empower students to lead the work as well in the classroom? So.
I wanted to make a comment on something I don't see, or maybe I'm just missing it. Did these have a specific, because I was bringing up before about the behavior education plans and our students with disabilities, that they're responded to differently. I do not see where those adjustments are, and I'm having a hard time locating them. Or if they did it, or if they did it in a separate document.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that what you're seeing here in this document is maybe it kind of at a higher level, and we'd have to kind of dig a little bit deeper and have more direct conversations with folks in those districts again to kind of get at what you're talking about. I think it's an important question, and it's not, it's not what we have in front of us isn't at that level right now.
Yeah, and I would say on the slide talking about misimplementation, there's the colorblind and powerblind misimplementation model, where we have to explicitly mention race. We have to explicitly mention the imbalance of power between students and staff, or students and police officers. Something that we have to do is explicitly mention the disparity that our students with disabilities and have IEPs are experiencing as well. So I view that as being explicit about what's been the historical wrong and how we go about adjudicating and doing better from that historical wrong. Because it's our Black students with special needs that are most adversely impacted. And so explicitly calling that out will be really important for us. And as we look into a board resolution, that's something that will be, that will certainly be an important voice that we have to center.
That's why I think that what someone said, well, they talked about needing a school to buy in. Like, I thought that was important because like people have to do the hard work for this, right? You could talk about being culturally, right? Because there's this thing we talk about, theory and practice, right? In theory, someone can be very versed on, I've heard people say, oh, I went and I got a degree in African American history. Yeah, that's theory. There's a difference between practice, right? My life is practice as an African American person, right? I'm an expert of my experience. And so I don't think that we really, like she said, hold adults accountable for doing the real hard work that is going to take to really put ourselves in a position to really be honest about why we are even at the place where we're at, and then trying to move forward in terms of making kids feel safe and what they need to do. And that's the thing to me that I think is our biggest hurdle is because, right, just like we talk about kids don't get to opt out, right? A kid has a blow up at school. We say, hey, tell us why you did this. Label your emotions. Tell us why. Write it down on this sheet of paper what you were going through. Like, and as adults, we don't do that. As adults, we get to melt down. We get to do anything we really want to do with really no accountability. And I think that when it comes to this being culturally relevant and breaking down, right, these racial barriers, these gender barriers, like, it's going to take some real hard work. And I will just say this, right, being honest to the people on here, the state at which I see our country in, but I'm gonna go more specifically to our state. I don't know if I trust that people are really in this work with me. And I'm just gonna be honest. I can look around and I'm like, I don't trust if this person is really in this work with me and for all of our children. And that's the hardest thing about this, because when you put people in a position to be successful, they will be successful. And I think it's hard to admit that, right? I work at a school where my administration is all white. That's not their fault. But guess what? I know that comes with blinders. How are we doing the hard work? How are we really pushing to make sure that all of our kids are getting what they need? And so to me, it really is about the adults. I know Maisha Wynn, I've done some training with her, some restorative justice training. I've done training where I've trained her and then she called me back to train other people. But I will sit in a school and people will look at me as if I don't have any expertise, but then I'm engaging with all of these kids who are in need of something. But because of my role, I can only do that in a small portion, in a small part, because nobody sees it as crucial or important, right? People see it as touchy-feely work. I've heard people say that, the touchy-feely work. Why do we have to do all that? So I'm all with the buy-in. People have to, but as adults, we got to do the hard work. When stuff feels uncomfortable for you, so what?
Yeah, thank you.
Savion.
Hello. Yep.
This is Coach. Can I chime in on for a minute?
Hey, Coach, please do. And then we're going to go on to the next slide, but please do.
The brother that just spoke, he basically synopsized what so many of us feel about it. And Bianca said something incredible. Then I heard a gentleman named Wayne say something that was so incredible. And I really just want to uplift what they said, because some of us as adults have the power to lose our mind and disintegrate, but not all of us. I want to speak to the fact that this buy-in is so important, but let's not forget, we are asking the oppressive, dominant, racist culture to buy in on something that they have the luxury to either embrace when it's politically beneficial, or to also socially stratify when they need so. So when the brother asked about the true buy-in, we have to keep asking that questions, because the buy-in will occur when somebody's looking, but as soon as someone's not looking, then it's a massive buyout. And we have to be always aware of that. And that makes me wonder, just like he said, who's really in this, to be honest about it? Who's really in this to make sure that we don't have any more cultures, any more decades of brown, black, indigenous, gay children going to these private prisons? Who's really buying in? Because we could talk about the practical application, we could talk about the theory of this, but if there's no policy of accountability and implementation in an honest way that really holds white supremacy accountable, then once again, we are losing children. So that's really important to have true buy-in, and not just buy-in when the lights are on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And this has been a common theme so far. What does accountability look like? Well, there has to be accountability, and getting the right people to observe and hold folks accountable. Thank you for that. That definitely is a common thread and should be especially highlighted in our collective recommendations. All right, if we could go to slide 16, please. Guiding question. Next slide. All right, so this was some of the homework. I just wanted to acknowledge that we did receive the recommendation from Freedom Inc. I do think that the spirit and their kernels of really important things that we have to do. Just did want to highlight that we are, we have to be compliant with state and federal law. And so I just wanted to uplift that there were certain things in that proposal that we're legally bound to not do because we have to be compliant with student privacy laws like FERPA. We have to be compliant with ESEA and Wisconsin statutes. And then we also have employee privacy laws and HR practices that we also have to be compliant to. We can get specific examples out to folks, but did just want to highlight that. And that there are certainly things, and especially the spirit, that we should continue to chew on and try to surface that in our recommendations. So for example, when police are permitted on school grounds, there are just things set out by state law and state statute that we have to involve police in. So we don't have full control over that, unfortunately. Or when we're talking about, reviewing student discipline, we can't necessarily give those student discipline records to third parties. We can't abdicate our responsibility as a district in that. And then we'd be in violation of FERPA and federal law. So I just wanted to put that out there. you know, I think the next thing that we're going to go through is kind of an exercise to try and tease out more recommendations or ideas for recommendations for policy and budget that we want to see forward. We only have 20 minutes left, so this will have to spill over in the next meeting. But yeah, I just wanted to lay that out there. Next slide, please. All right, so a quick review on some of the homework we've had over the last few months. Well, no, sorry. Yeah, just an overview of and documentation. And Bryn, if you could help lead us through this exercise.
Yeah, I can just go quickly. I'm just assisting with explaining the process, and then I'll hand it back to Savion to get to all of you. So I'll go really fast because we want to get to all of you, and actual policy and budget recommendations to start getting those into the space. So this is the policy, or sorry, this is the process. Tonight, we probably in the remaining time won't get to everyone, but we'll get started on this, get everyone sharing recommendations. I'm going to take rapid notes while people are talking in that template document that was sent out ahead of time. Then whatever I type up tonight will circulate so everyone can reflect on it. And I don't know, Savion, if you'll want to have people, you know, send in things in writing in the interim, that then we can add to that list so that then everybody can sort of review each other's ideas in the November 20th to 30th timeframe, share additions, comments with the co-chairs or any of us on the admin team so we can get it all in one place, everyone's policy and budget recommendation ideas. Then we can send it back around on December 1st for everybody to look at each other's ideas or comments or questions. And then at the December 3rd meeting, we can review it all together again and hopefully be at the point where we could try to reach consensus on final recommendations. So if we go to the next slide, Barb, we'll just go super fast because these were just really in there as reminders. These are slides from prior meetings. So these are the policies we've already been over, 41, 47, and we've reviewed them in prior meetings. But these are, and then Barb, you can go to the next one. And then just a reminder, these were some questions that had been given as homework about prompting people's thinking around policy 41, 47, and any thoughts around that policy specifically. And if we go to the next one, and then these are the two other policies. And the reason why we're hitting these three policies, just to bring these back in your mind, is this is in the ad hoc charge. It's to look at these three policies, but then there is also space to look at other policy and budget recommendations related to safety and security and the general charge of the ad hoc. So if we go to the next one, then I think we're ready to just start going around and getting people's thoughts. And this is, the point is to just get everyone's thoughts out in the open related to all the thinking you've been doing over this whole time period as far as what policy and budget recommendations you want to see come out of this ad hoc. And so this is more of like a brainstorming time. And then we can, I'll take notes and we can share those notes back with everyone. So Savion, I'll let you maybe go to the next slide, which just has, these are some general categories of things that we have discussed over the last 6 weeks. These are in no way like fixed categories. It's simply, these were simply put out here just to kind of jog people's memories about different concepts we've talked about. Feel free to suggest a whole new, topic heading or relate to one of these topics. And I'll hand it back to you, Savion.
Thank you so much, Bryn. I'll just add a new heading, and I can anticipate Martha bringing this up, but the intersection with special education and our students with disabilities has that intersection, or that intersectionality has to be central based off the data that we've seen over the years. So, I mean, I can start with restorative justice training. I think, it's beyond training. It's got to be continuous learning, quite frankly. It's something that AU and Lori have brought up, but the board going through restorative justice training and being able to model that. And so all our staff can model it. And developing student leaders. So this is kind of related, but restorative justice training and increased youth voice. How do we empower student leaders to be restorative justice leaders in our schools? I don't know if we can get more organic than students helping their peers go through conflict. I think that would be our ideal, best world scenario. But that particularly interested with that. I'm curious if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, can I jump in? So
Oh, please.
I'm just a clarifying question of the process of what we're doing right now. Is it that right now we are working on that, are we finalizing that recommendation for policy and budget as we speak? And then is this the only time that we're gonna have to actually solidify those recommendations or to speak like us together in a group?
No, absolutely not. We'll probably be doing this the next meeting and maybe one after if we decide to have one after. But I think this is more of a brainstorming session, and we'll definitely be returning to these as well.
Okay, thank you. The other question that I had is that we know that, we acknowledge that Freedom Inc. Sent their policy recommendation, and they're like, what you said, Savian, some limitations. I would love it if we can talk about those limitations and the policy that they are recommended as a whole group, with them being in the room right now, because Bianca is not. So are we gonna have an opportunity to do that?
Yeah, we really wanted to do it tonight. I was not aware Bianca would be leaving early, but we were planning to talk about some of those legal limitations tonight, and we'll certainly do that next meeting as well.
Okay, great, because that would also, I think that it will inform us as well when we are like, being creative and all that, about all that. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, I don't want anyone to be voluntold, but I'm gonna just start picking on people.
So you just want recommendations that we have right now, right?
Yeah, recommendations, free-flowing thoughts, brainstorming.
Significant increase in funding. Significant increase in funding for within the concept of restorative justice. Significant increase in funding.
Yeah, would certainly be interested in going through this exercise with you and Lori, but just reviewing all the grants that all those other districts received, looking at those organizations and seeing what they have available now as well. Because, we've got the funding that we can repurpose from the SRO contract. I've got a feeling that won't be enough. And so certainly getting a more commitment from the board and its budget, but also what of those organizations that provided grants to those districts. Let's get a list and see what they have available right now too. Marcus?
Yeah, I can go. I get that there may be limitations, but I come from the school of thought where if you need the 5, ask for 10. With that said, I think as we think about recommendations, full-time RJ folk, 100% school-based RJ position, I think is really important. You talked a little bit about it, but courses in RJ for students that they can take towards credit for graduation. As we build and grow this within the culture of our schools, I think that's really important and really vital that we give it a space within our system. We have a referendum that just passed. Leveraging that to create smaller class sizes, I think is tremendous. As we talk about building relationships and creating that and really changing the water that we swim in, right? And we talk about the culture and the structure that we exist in as it relates to really doing this well. Smaller class sizes allowing teachers to really build authentic relationships, allowing kids to manage authentic relationships with other students and adults. Dedicated spaces, again, leveraging that referendum, dedicated spaces within our schools for RJ work to happen, dedicated spaces in our school, separate of the RJ space for mental health services to happen, dedicated spaces in our school for other student supports stuff to happen, right? So we want these different things to happen. We got to create spaces that aren't the same, right? As a dean, my office is all three of those things, right? And some days that's not tenable and that's not sustainable. And so we're trying to do all three of those things for our students in the same space, and that doesn't work. Let me see what else I got on my list. I love Anthony's suggestion of having a staff person who, again, I think when we think about the role of the SRO, ERO, however we want to kind of label it, one of those key things was the liaison from the school with law enforcement. And one thing that they gave us a lot of was that information as to there was an issue in the community that may come into school the next morning, and we were able to have a heads up on it and be able to, get our minds around it, support those students, check in with them, figure out how things are going, right? I think that value in that role is still very important, and we need to find a way to replicate that piece of that role. And I think that's really important. So some way in which we are replicating that aspect of that role is key and vital in supporting our kids and making sure that school can be a safe place, separate from whatever turmoil they came in from the community that happened in the community coming into the building. So those are some things off the top of my head. I know other folks got things, but those are some things off the top of my head.
And I would echo everything that Marcus has already said, and then also add in there, like, how are we having funding for meaningful alternatives to suspension, and like what that might look like, and being able to be creative, because we think about like when like suspension is easy and it doesn't take a lot of thought. And so if we really want to think about getting to the root cause of the problem, we need time, space, and money to do that, and to not have it just be a circle that's the option, or youth court. Like, how can we go further than that and really look at what happened and really have meaningful opportunities? The other thing that I would say is, how are we looking at school-based mental health in all of the high schools and having it be representative of our students? So having clinicians that look like our students and that they're able to access and really get some much needed support and have it be done in a place where they're consistently coming every day. And then I just, again, want to echo a full-time person for restorative practices and the training piece, and really it being from K-12, like that is something that our staff are trained in, and it consistently trained in and retrained. And as new learning comes out, new learning is available, and it's something that we continue to come to every day. And then I think really also just continuing to strive for the commitment that the staff in the schools look like the students, and especially our teaching staff. Like, how are we really pushing to make sure that we're spending money to recruit staff of color, especially teaching staff of color, and making spaces for that to happen, and really being intentional about how we are protecting our staff of color and allowing them to be promoted, and especially thinking about what money can we put into our students who might be interested in going into education to come back and work in MMSD, and really starting to promote that as well.
Wow.
And I'll just add something quick with all that the high school staff have said. Just reaching out to the families as well, just making sure that they know that we're moving to this restorative justice or restorative mindset, so we can get them trained as well. I think it's huge for us as a community in MSD.
Savion.
Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
Whoever said the organic aspect of understanding that what happens at home impacts what happens in the school. There is no separation in that. We might want to think that children don't bring home drama to school, but home drama creates, in many cases, it creates school drama. So someone just said a true outreach and true engagement in what's going on at home is very, very important, because that influences and impacts, and in many cases controls what happens with the youth at school. And I want to make another really strong suggestion. We always talk about how we want so many people of color in school, We want people who look like us but aren't afraid to be us. We're not a monolithic people. Everybody has their own opinions what people, but being black or brown is or has to be. But one thing we all have to agree on, being an advocate for your culture should not be something that's left up in the air. So let's get black and brown people in buildings that are actually want to be change agents. And instead of just being so happy to be there that they look at the blanket injustices and just the raw racism and they disappear and hide. We can no longer afford to have anybody black or brown in our buildings that's afraid to speak up for these children. And for the people of color in the building that are trying to be voices that are being attacked as well. We must start pushing that agenda as well. Just because you're skin folk don't mean you can folk. We must have black people and brown people in buildings that are not just so damn happy to be there that they don't do anything. And that's is too much of a problem in our schools as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sadie, I want to jump back in real quick with one more thing before you move on. And thinking about another suggestion is also thinking about our academic options. And I'm thinking high school. And I don't even want to say alternatives, but thinking about how do we help kids recover who may have struggled academically, either as 9th graders, 10th graders, because right now we don't have great programming to help kids recover and regain some traction within the current context of a 7-hour a day, 7 class a day, 5 days a week framework. So what are we going to develop as a district and offer so that kids who may be disengaged or have had struggles previously can re-engage and find themselves within our system, right? Because that's also a big part of safety and security. Is kids feeling there's a purpose for them. There's something fulfilling that's going to happen for them academically within the context of what happens with their education. And right now having, 4 just straight comprehensive high schools that are pretty much all doing the same thing as far as the water that we swim in, 7 hours a day, 7 classes, 7 different adults. We need some additional options for our students. And I'm not saying that we pushing nobody out. I want meaningful, humanizing things for our kids that are going to honor who they are, that are going to validate who they are and how they learn, and help them find a path to actualizing their full self.
And I was just going to sort of piggyback a little bit on that too, if I could, just that I think, some of these things sometimes we do in silos, but there has to be probably a connection with curriculum in this conversation as well, because I think there's conversations that we have all the time separately, but in order to empower some of our kids, they need to see themselves in the curriculum. They need to see themselves in the history that's not starting with slavery, So I think there's some development work that could be sort of in conjunction or collaboration as well with curriculum development.
That is so real, so real.
Like Bettina Love says that we teach children of color about their oppression, but we don't teach them about the resistance and the movements of resistance, and or only like as if that resistance only happens once a month during that specific community of color celebration month, and that's it. We're like the resistance happening all day, all the time, every moment for 400 years.
More than 400 years. I think it's absurd for us not to know who Marcus Garvey is, but we know what size shoes George Washington wore. Let's get back to allowing the true Black voices to teach, inspire, so we don't have to worry about empowering our youth. If we move stuff out of the way, they can empower themselves. We just have to put the right tools in front of them and allow them to tell us what tools they need, because I hear so much chatter about this gap that we call an achievement gap, and we all know that it's an opportunity gap. Let's move nonsense out the way and give the children the freedom to recognize their own greatness, and then we will truly watch things happen. And at the same time, we can't do this in silos, as somebody just said, and it was brilliantly said. We must allow the truth warriors in these schools for children to be protected and continue to have their voices, because what happens so many times when you marginalize youth, you remove the Black and brown people speak to them in a way they understand and who uplift and support them. And one thing entrenched racism does is remove the true protectors of children and get them out the building. That's why we keep having this classic recycling of apathy in our communities.
I just wanted to quickly mention too, sorry, that Principal LaRosa had to run for his daughter's conference, but he also has recommendations, and I know we'll need more time for this, Savion. So he has mentioned taking funding that was for SROs and using it for life coaches and additional mental health practitioners to help students dream about what they need and fulfill their dreams.
Yeah, I feel I don't want to end the conversation right now, but we do have to conclude the meeting. And just a quick note on mental health. This is something I've been aware of since I was a senior in high school back in 2013. But every year with the mental health screening from the county, we see an increase in the number of students exhibiting signs of depression and anxiety. And we really have to explore why that is, what's going on in our society that our youth are feeling more depressed, more anxious, and maybe even having more suicidal ideation. That's something that we really have to, on a long-term basis, explore and think about, and how we want our culture in our school buildings to try and address that. So thank you. We definitely want to pick up this conversation next time we meet in December. That'll be after the holidays, so I hope y'all have safe holidays, being able to connect with family safely. Before we conclude, I just want to approve the minutes from the last meeting. So real quick, I move that the minutes from the Safety and Security Ad Hoc Committee meeting dated November 5th, 2020 be approved. Can I please get a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor, aye, or hands up, or whatever. All right. And can I get a motion to adjourn? Adjourn.
Make a motion that we adjourn.
Okay, thank you. I second that. All those in favor?
Hey, Patrice.
All right. I hope you have a good night. Have a good holiday. Being able
Memorial
to
represented.
That's all it's out here. All right. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.